Hello there my Jedi and Sith friends, my Mandalorians, my Megalorians, and I think I see someone who is new to the group. But welcome whether it's your first video or you've been here since the beginning, I appreciate you for joining me today. This is a video I've been anticipating making for many months. The Art of Andor just dropped. I purchased my copy, I read through it, and there are some massive reveals. Some original deleted concepts, deleted scenes, designs, as well as the original scrapped plot. Andor was almost very different. So we're gonna go through everything. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't, but no more jibber jabber, let's dive straight in. So Andor is now widely considered to be one of the best written Star Wars projects, pretty much in the entire saga. Praised for its mature themes, political depth, and exceptional character development. And even though it was written to be a prequel to 2016's Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, it embraces its own identity. Instead of just filling in narrative gaps, Andor carves out its own thematic space. It tells a story that feels distinct from both Rogue One and A New Hope. It does still have some of those beloved characters and a good connective through line, especially in Season 2, but as a Star Wars show, you can watch it and appreciate it on its own. But did you know, my friends, that wasn't always the case? Because when the show was originally handed to Zootopia writer Jared Bush, Andor was conceived of as a Rogue One prequel that aligned much more with the movie's tone. It was going to take a very different direction to what Tony Gilroy ended up giving us. Nonetheless, the original story does sound very intriguing. And in the new book, The Art of Andor, we finally learn about the original deleted synopsis. The fledgling rebellion experiences a crippling setback when an Imperial mole, hidden within its ranks, decimated a series of rebel bases. Cassian Andor, a young intelligence operative, is one of the few who survive, only to be falsely accused of being the mole himself. Out in the cold, Cassian discovers that the only way to clear his name and find the mole is to infiltrate an Imperial planet which holds the key to uncovering the mole's identity. This is a very different kind of show, and the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that originally Andor was described as a spy thriller, and when the show came out, a lot of people were saying that, yes, there are some spy thriller elements, but it's more of a Star Wars drama. But now, having read through this original synopsis, the designation of spy thriller makes a lot more sense. It's kind of like a mystery whodunit, an Imperial spy working within the rebellion. But in the final version of the show, if you think of the likes of Loni Young, Mon Mothma to an extent, doing private dealings with the rebellion while still being a senator, we were kind of given a reverse scenario where double agents were infiltrating the Empire. Even in Rogue One, if you think of the importance of characters like Galen Erso, Bodhi Rook, without their actions, without their heroics, the rebels would never have learnt about the Death Star plans. But I have to say, as a fandom, we've kind of been operating under this assumption that the original version of Andor by Jared Bush was nowhere near as good as the story written by Tony Gilroy. But I have to admit, despite giving the edge to Tony on this one, Jared's version is pretty darn solid. The idea of an Imperial operative infiltrating the rebellion, passing information back to the ISB, that is a very cool story. We do have some interesting early concepts. Here is Cassian and K2SO. This was going to be for the original script, and this is when K2 was going to appear in the first season. In the end, they retconned how they met in the comics, and K2 only appears near the end of Season 2. He was a repurposed KX security droid who was part of the Gorman massacre. But in the first iteration of the show, K2 was present from the very first moment, and did you know, Cassian was originally meant to have a second companion, a humanoid alien woman called Avni. And here's a quote from Jared Bush: aside from K2SO, Cassian's primary relationship was with a woman called Avni, a non-Allegiant mercenary who lives on a planet called Okara. She herself is an Okaran, obtaining and selling information to the highest bidder. Cassian and Avni have a history that was probably romantic. So for all intents and purposes, Avni was the original Bix. This is someone Cassian had a romantic relationship with. They broke up, but he still relied on her for information. And maybe just like in the final version of the show, they eventually would get back together again. And originally, if that was also in the cards, although I doubt it, Andor Jr. would have been half Okaran. But here's the thing, while the final version of Andor changed the plot, many of the characters, some of the original version was retained, in one form or another. For instance, it was always in the cards from day one to have the opening scene take place in a bar, but instead of Morlana, it was the Imperial stronghold of Okara. It was called the Catacomb Club, set in an alluring underground space reclaimed from the ruins of a long-forgotten culture. Just like with Preox Morlana, it's a place frequented by officers, as well as underworld thugs. It's a great place for hedonism, but also the perfect place to eavesdrop and trade information. And I was just thinking about the design of Okarans, and it might just be a coincidence, but it seems that they repurposed this blue alien design for one of the bartenders on Morlana 1, the one who tells Cassian, "You pay at the end." And isn't that a really interesting bit of foreshadowing? Because in the end, Cassian did pay. But when it comes to Cassian's backstory, searching for his sister, the flashbacks to Kenari, that was all Tony Gilroy. They say one of Tony Gilroy's most critical tasks was getting Diego Luna up to speed and in agreement with his new story direction. "I was in what we call the second floor," Luna recalled, "and Tony says to me, 'Look, I figured it out. I think I know what I want to do.' And that's when he told him about Cassian's new motivations, because up until that point, Diego Luna was only familiar with the original version. And one of the early ideas was to show Cassian's childhood, how he had been, quote, "in this fight since he was 6 years old." And the book states that Tony wanted Kenari to be a Rousseau painting, vibrant, colourful, and the idea was that everything they were wearing was old mining equipment. That's how they built their village. That's how they were surviving. Cassian's dad, Clem, went through various conceptual designs, as did B2EMO. And then we come on to the genius retcon of Ferrix. Before Andor, in the Rogue One visual guide and in connecting material, Cassian's homeworld was Fest, but in the show we know he's from Kenari and was taken to be raised on Ferrix. And Marva explains that putting Fest as his homeworld was just for his paperwork. It was a fabricated backstory to conceal where he was actually from. I always thought this was a genius bit of writing. Something else I really wanted to highlight in this book are the original concepts for Luthen. He was always a vague iteration of Stellan Skarsgård, but he had so many more looks that were never included in the show. You have the moustache look, some of the original versions of his Coruscant attire, where I've always said he looks like a counterpart to Palpatine, but we also have an amazing new look at his time with the Republic. His name was Leia, which is rail backwards, and we now know that years prior to Andor, he was working as a mud trooper. He worked for the Republic, and then very briefly, the Empire, pretty much as the transition happened, just before he met Claire Markey. I know a lot of fans wanted him to be a former Jedi, but I think his backstory works so much better. A man of good conscience, who once worked with the Republic, and once the Empire rose, devised a plan to take down the regime. Moving on to Mon Mothma, who a lot of fans like to call Mummy Mothma. Originally, she was conceived to look like the way she did in Revenge of the Sith. Genevieve O'Reilly was the younger version of Mon Mothma in George Lucas's prequel trilogy, but her scenes from episode 3 were scrapped, notably the Delegation of 2000 scenes. Before she was given so many really cool outfits, she was meant to look exactly as she did in episode 3. But I'm glad they changed it up a bit. One of the founders of the Rebel Alliance deserves to look glamorous. The same can be said of Bail Organa. As we know, Jimmy Smits wasn't available, and so Benjamin Bratt filled in. He did a great job. I'll always associate Bail Organa with Jimmy, but I have to admit, Benjamin was wonderful. He did the best he could. But now on to one of my favourite characters, Clea. Not too many changes from the concept art, but I will say that originally, she was going to enter the hospital in episode 10 to save Luthen, dressed pretty much like Padme Amidala from The Phantom Menace. This doesn't help the theory that she was once one of Padme's handmaidens. Obviously we know that's not true. We saw a backstory in flashbacks, we were taken to Naboo, but she had nothing, as far as we know, to do with Padme. And speaking of Naboo, the mural, which was included in the episode, does have some cool Easter eggs, some of the creatures that we know and love from the prequel days. Same with the Easter eggs from Luthen's shop. The knife that he uses to, sacrifice his life was a Nautolan bleeder, Nautolan being the species of Kit Fisto, who ironically is one of the first Jedi that Palpatine kills when he reveals himself to be the Sith Lord that the Jedi were looking for. We know about the Gungan skull, but did you know about the Dathomirian skull? Another blink and you miss it Easter egg. One thing I was really excited to read about is the Rakatan Sky Kyber which Luthen gives to Cassian, but this book only mentions it in passing. They don't mention wider connections to the ancient past, they just show what the original concept looked like. I thought it was an awesome callback. But did you know, my friends, that Mina Rao was inspired by early concepts for The Force Awakens? Not so much the planet itself, but the idea of having agricultural droids as well as agricultural creatures. It's also just great to see alternate versions of the characters that we've come to know and love. That's just a selection of some of my favourite highlights from it. I might make some follow-up videos if you guys want to learn more about it. Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, my friends, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, check out my last video, and I'll see you next time. May the Force be with you, always.